Welcome to exercise 1, working with layers and artboards. Now before we start drawing, it's a good idea to know about the layers that we're working with and the artboards that we have currently. So hopefully by now you've learned how to navigate within the Illustrator interface and you're a little bit comfortable inside Illustrator. So for this exercise, I want to make sure that I'm using the black arrow tool. So if I come up here and click the black arrow, or I can hit the V key for black arrow, that's going to ensure that you're selecting objects in the correct manner for this exercise. So let's dive into the layers panel. Now, if you remember from the earlier lecture, everything that we create in Adobe Illustrator is an object. And so these objects can be found inside of our layers and also on the artboards, as well as the canvas, which is the darker area outside of the artboard. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my layers panel. I'll come over to Window and I can go down to Layers, or I can come over here to this icon right here named Layers and click that panel open. Now as soon as I open that layer, you can see that I have about 5 different layers and they all have names. And right now they're a little hard to see in this view. So if you remember before, we have this options icon. I'm going to come up here and click that, and then I'm going to go to panel options down here at the bottom. And I'm going to change the size at which I'm viewing all of these layers. I'm going to go from medium to large. So now that I can see each one of those layers a little bit better, I can go through and explain these. So each one of these layers has a few features associated with it. Right here on the very left, this is the toggling the visibility option. So if I click on that, you can see that all the objects within that layer will hide or become visible again. Right next to that is the lock icon, or locking the layer. So right now this layer is unlocked, and if I were to come over here to this yellow circle and start moving it, okay, it's editable. But if I hit the lock icon, it makes it so it's locked into place and I can't move it. There's always a color associated with every layer. So you can see right here, this is a red highlight color. So that means if I come over here and I select that object, it's going to be highlighted in red. We're going to be able to see the paths in red. If I were to click the object next to it, this blue square, it's on a different layer. And so you can see there's a different color associated with that particular layer. To the right of the color is the actual preview of the layer and the contents within it. Next to that is the name of the layer. And then next to that is 2 other features for layers that helps you identify the objects within a layer and actually move those objects around. So in this exercise, we're going to kind of go through some of these other options like naming and modifying our layers, selecting objects and moving them within the layers, revealing sublayers, and then also creating new layers and creating sublayers. So let's go ahead and kind of play around with that. So for this exercise, what we want to do is we want to make this bottom part match this top composition. So to do that, we're going to have to go through and kind of play around with these layers. Now the first thing I notice in this composition is that my yellow square should be behind my blue square. So I can just come over here to my layer that has the yellow circle within it, and I can click right next to the name, right in this area. I'm going to click and hold and drag down, not into the blue layer, but right below it. I'm going to see a blue line. So make sure not to highlight the next layer. You want to be right in between. And I'm going to release. And so we could do that with a few other layers. We can see with some of these objects, we're not able to see them right now because they're hidden. So let's go ahead and toggle open the visibility on those. And so now we can see all the different objects that we need to move around. The next thing I can see is that I need this series of green dots to be on the very top. So I can take this and I can move those green dots all the way up to the top. I'm looking for a nice line that's highlighted at the top, and I'll release. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle open the visibility on these hidden layers. And that way I can see all the objects for this composition. Now one thing I can see right here is I have the name of the shape, so in this case purple star, but then in the preview right here I don't actually see this purple star. I see this other set of shapes, which are the green dots. And so what I can do is I can actually individually select these objects and then move them into different layers. So let's try that. I'm going to go ahead and choose this purple star, and you can see it highlights the object and there's a bounding box around it. And if you look right over here in the layers panel, there's a green square. That indicates that we've selected that individual object. I know that I need to pull this into a different layer right below. So I'm going to take this green square, I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to drag it right down into the purple star layer and release. Then I'll do the same thing with the green dots. I'm going to select the green dots, and then I see that there's now a blue square within this layer, and I need it to go here into this green dots layer. So I'll go ahead and click and drag and release that into the green dots layer. I'll go ahead and do that with the red hexagon as well. I'll take this red hexagon and I will drag it up into the red hexagon layer. So we've gone ahead and organized the objects into their correct layers, but we're still missing layers that are associated with the individual shape. So let's go ahead and learn how to create new layers. I'm going to go ahead and click on the very bottom layer that says exercise template, and then I'm going to go down here to the bottom of the panel. This is where we're going to get a whole new set of options. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, so it's right next to the trash can icon. And by default, layers are always created on top of the layer that's selected. So now that I've created that new layer, I'm going to double click right next to the name, and that's going to pull up some layer options. I'm going to go ahead and rename this yellow circle, and you can see right here I can change the highlight color for all the objects associated in this layer. So I'll go ahead and change that to a gold and click OK. Now that I've created that new layer, I can actually take that yellow circle object, which is currently in the red hexagon layer, and I can drag it down into a layer that has its name associated with it. So I'm going to go through and kind of keep organizing these layers. So I know the blue square needs to be below the green dots. So I'll click on the blue square. Make sure you click next to the name and not on the name. And I'll drag that right on top of yellow circle. I'll take the purple star and I'll drag that all the way up. And we're just about done. But one thing is, we still need that orange triangle. That orange triangle happens to be embedded in one of these layers, in what's called the sublayer. So if I click here on the purple star, on this right pointing arrow, I'm going to toggle open all of the paths associated with this layer. So this just has one path associated with it, which is the star. I can do that for the red hexagon. I'm going to toggle those back in. I'll do that for the green dots, and we can see those dots are actually a group of objects, which we will go over later. And I'll open up the blue square, and here we go. We can see that within this blue square layer, we have the blue square path, but then right below it, we have the triangle. So this is what we need to change. We need to move this triangle out of this sublayer, and we need to move it above the blue square layer. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the blue square and create a new layer. I'll double click on the name and I'll rename this triangle. Then I'll actually come down back to that sublayer, layer 8, and where that square should be, I will click. And you can see it's highlighting that object, and I didn't have to click onto the artboard. I did it all within the layer. So now I can take this object and move that up into the triangle layer. Now that I've moved that object, I don't really have a need for this layer anymore. So I can click on layer 8 and I can come over to the trash can icon and delete that. Now I can toggle that close, click outside. So hopefully after working with layers here in Illustrator, you guys feel a little bit more comfortable. One of the first things that I do when I open up a file is I open up the layers panel to see what I'm working with. As we move into other projects and exercises, you want to make sure that you're comfortable with adding new layers and moving objects around within those layers. As you get more advanced in working in Illustrator, you want to make sure that you are utilizing the layers panel for your design creation.